Back to the Future was the movie of 1985.
What are you looking at, butthead?
Sure, you had Out of Africa or The Colour Purple, but Back to the Future was the one that you actually watched twice. In part 2 of our review, we'll look at the sequels, Back to the Future Part 2 and Part 3. Back to the Future was a major success, becoming the biggest grossing film of 1985. And so a sequel was almost a certainty. Zemeckis and Gale kicked around ideas before finally producing a script long enough to cover 2 movies. And so Back to the Future Part 2 became Parts 2 and 3.
Great Scott!
Most of the cast were ready to return, with the notable exceptions of Crispin Glover, who could not come to terms with producers, and Claudia Wells, who played Jennifer, who had retired from acting, and so both roles were recast, with varying results.
Hey Doc, we better back up. We don't have enough road to get up to 88.
Roads? We don't need roads.
Back to the Future's Parts 2 and 3 were filmed back to back and planned to be released 6 months apart.
Hope you know what you're doing.
Back to the Future Part 2 is the most complicated of the trilogy, both in terms of its storytelling and the complexity of special effects. Zemeckis having delivered Who Framed Roger Rabbit in 1988, a film that melded animated characters with live-action actors and locations, really wanted to push the envelope with effects technology available at the time, which meant motion control rigs and a lot of optical compositing.
I'll do it, buddy, whatever you say. Stay down and shut up.
Actors would appear on screen with themselves, playing multiple versions of the same character or relatives in the same shot.
Why isn't she home yet?
I'm not sure where Jennifer is, Mom. Should have been home hours ago.
After a reshot reprise from the first film,
What, do we become assholes or something?
Doc Brown takes Marty and Jennifer to Hill Valley of 2015 in order to prevent Marty Jr. from getting involved with the local hood's schemes.
I'm a fly! Don't go anywhere! You're next!
Griff is the grandson of Biff and doesn't readily take no for an answer.
Check drying. Your jacket is now dry.
Part 2 also manages to add some complexity to Marty by not making him a saint in this film. He now loses control if somebody implies that he's a coward.
Chicken!
Chicken.
What's wrong, dude? You yellow?
Chicken!
And he also wants to put the time machine to profitable use by buying a book containing 20th century sports results.
Now maybe we could place a couple bets.
Marty!
Which will set in motion a series of events. Basically, older Biff steals the book, borrows the time machine, and gives the book to his younger self of 1955.
And how a trip to the racetrack on his 21st birthday made him a millionaire overnight.
When Marty and Doc first return to 85, they find everything has changed. Biff is now a super rich casino owner, married to a now top-heavy Lorraine. Biff is determined to prevent Marty from revealing the secret behind his good fortune. Yeah, this is a darker middle film of the trilogy type deal. Doc Brown and Marty then travel back to 1955 to retrieve the book, but at the same time as the events of the first film. Having restored the timeline, the DeLorean is struck by lightning and vanishes before Marty's eyes.
Jennifer, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're in a time machine.
Released in late 1989, Part 2 is the one where the ideas go nuts, which is not a knock on the more sedate third chapter.
I gotta check this out, Doc.
The realization of the then future but now past, extrapolating from the late 80s into the 21st century, was always going to be a shot in the dark. We don't have flying cars or hoverboards, well, at least ones that don't explode. But they also don't have TikTok. Who's to say which is the better future? One thing Part 2 really does get right, ongoing 80s nostalgia that just won't go away. No good ever seems to have come from time travel, apart from some whales, jelly babies, and wild stallions. Michael J. Fox, as they say in show business, really gets into the weeds with Marty and all of the variations. In this film, Fox plays teenage Marty, middle-aged Marty, Marty Jr., and somewhat worryingly, Marty's daughter. We should be thankful he also doesn't play Lorraine, George, and Jennifer because, well, you know, I'm sure Fox was game.
Doc, I'm all for that. What's wrong with making a few bucks on the side?
And Thomas F. Wilson, probably the only main cast member of this trilogy who didn't really break out of these films in any meaningful way, gets to portray part bionic Griff, as well as teenage Biff, two different middle-aged Biffs, and elderly Biff. He's a boffo Biff, top-of-the-line Biff, a top-shelf bully turned evil antagonist. Each version is a natural progression of a bully through the years. I mean, the sagging gut and terrible wig, that seems to be middle-aged and older bully to a T.
You want to take a poke at me?
Leah Thompson plays young Lorraine, grandmother Lorraine, quiche Lorraine, and two different middle-aged Lorraines, only one of whom can go jogging without sustaining head trauma. Elizabeth Shue takes over the role of Jennifer, a character who seems to be in the film only because she was in the final scene of the first film. Unconscious for most of the movie and lugged around like Weekend at Bernie's, only funny, she's written out faster than Poochie returning to his home planet.
Then what did you bring her for?
Crispin Glover's absence presented a problem as he was a hard act to top, so they had another actor covered in heavy prosthetics to play George. Glover, to this day, remains royally pissed off about this.
First, let me assure you that I'm alive and well. I've been living happily these past 8 months in the year 1885.
Part 2 was also a hit, but the darker tone and cliffhanger left a slightly sour taste in the mouths of some moviegoers. Or maybe it was all the horse shit. I was one of them, I mean about the viewer, not the horse shit. And even though the film has a teaser for Part 3 before the credits have even rolled, people were left feeling uneasy. But now everyone has perspective and has seen how the story ends.
Somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985.
So, Part 2 has been embraced for its audacity in storytelling, technical prowess, and expanding the canon.
Nobody calls me chicken.
People really love the scene set in 2015, and the third act revisiting of the third film seemed to give audiences a huge boost. But maybe it's the film's middle, christened as Biff Horrific by the filmmakers, with George McFly having been murdered by Biff, that maybe just seems a little too dark, like chocolate that has the word 70% cocoa on the label.
Just sent you back to the future.
Yeah. Oh, I know, he did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Great Scott.
Back in the day, we had to wait 3 years to see how Empire Strikes Back was resolved in Return of the Jedi.
Ooh la la!
For Back to the Futures 2 and 3, there was a 6-month gap. Part 3 was definitely a different type of story for these characters.
I'll have, ice water.
In here, we pour whiskey.
Part 3, released in May 1990, was just a lot simpler than Part 2. Like making macaroni and cheese the day after hosting a dinner party where the Colonel was murdered in the drawing room. Marty of 1985 enlists the help of Doc Brown of 1955 to help him travel to 1885 where 1985 Doc Brown is living. A headstone shows Doc Brown was killed by the outlaw Mad Dog Tannen, only days after Doc had written a letter to Marty in the future. Marty travels back to the Old West, meets some of his ancestors, and then gets to play a character based on one of his cowboy heroes.
What's your name, dude?
Mart Eastwood. Clint Eastwood.
What kind of stupid name is that?
The Doc, meanwhile, has fallen in love with school teacher Clara Clayton and isn't sure he wants to return to the present, which for us is now the past, but not the past as 1985, which is also the past, but not the far past as opposed to the near past. Have you been taking notes? So in the far past, Mad Dog intends to kill Doc Brown over the matter of $80, which, to be fair, isn't far off the tone of a letter from the TV licensing people. After the hectic pace of the second film, Part 3 is a lot smaller in scope, without hitting the viewer over the head with new concepts every scene. Yet it doesn't really feel like a huge come down because it fits the story of the film and the series. Back to the Future Part 3 also has a romance about it. There's the romance of the West, but less metaphorically, the romance between Doc and schoolteacher Clara, played by Mary Steenburgen.
Oh, I've heard some whoppers in my day, but the fact that you'd expect me to entertain a notion like that is so insulting and degrading.
As a result, Christopher Lloyd has a lot more to do than the previous films, in which Marty was in almost every scene. Here, Doc Brown is torn between his newfound love and his duty to protect the timelines.
We shall proceed as planned, and as soon as we return to 1985, we'll destroy this infernal machine. Traveling through time has become much too painful.
In places, the movie has fun by swapping the roles of Marty and Doc Brown.
May not be my name that's supposed to end up on this tombstone. It may be yours.
Great Scott.
I know, this is heavy.
Having parts 2 and 3 planned as one massive project paid off in spades. Seemingly throwaway scenes or lines in part 2, such as Marty playing a video game or Biff watching a fistful of dollars, pay off in part 3. You know how you keep changing your car's door bin and it rattles around, annoying everyone every time you take a corner too fast? But then you go to a new supermarket where you can only unlock a shopping cart if you have a coin, and lo and behold, your car is full of them? Who's the genius now? Well, it's absolutely nothing like that. These films were planned out better than the next 50 years of Marvel movies.
Where'd you learn to shoot like this?
7-Eleven.
Part 3 nails the look and feel of the Old West, just as the first film did a great job of making you feel transported back to the 50s. It takes elements from all different types of westerns, the classic era westerns, later American revisionist westerns, and of course spaghetti westerns. Which western era do you want to see? Well, have all of them. And add horse shit because that's always funny.
I hate manure.
Part 3 was also successful, but it was also the end of the trilogy, and after the pure inventiveness of Part 2, audiences felt, well, that's it. While there was an early 90s cartoon series, Zemeckis and Gale have steadfastly refused to allow any form of reboot or continuation of the film series during their lifetime. Like any story that was apparently wrapped up, 90s audiences quickly put the trilogy behind them, like they did with Star Wars and Indiana Jones. But like this odd rash I've got, Back to the Future just wouldn't go away.
What idiot dressed you in that outfit?
You did.
There were even a few before they were famous roles for Billy Zane and Elijah Wood, who was the star of the video game The Legend of Spyro. I think he did some other movies, but I don't really know them.
So why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?
Each time there was a new home media format, the release of Back to the Future would be one of those franchises that everyone clamoured for. The fascination with the films or the DeLorean has only increased over time, with new generations attracted to the adventures of Marty McFly and Doc Brown and their time-travelling DeLorean.
Doc, I thought I'd never see you again!
You can't keep a good titus down!
Which of the three is best? I don't want to pick, because while I'm someone who's generally not prone to compulsive behaviour, I have this thing where if I watch a movie in the series, I kinda need to watch them all in order. There's a medical term for it, annoying.
I said that's 10, you gutless yellow pie slinger!
He's an asshole.
Conversely, trying to pick the worst is also hard. Like if you asked me which adult child I liked least. Though, I suppose if you pressed me, I'd have to go with the murderer. But the first film is perfect. The second is a sequel that builds on the first in several interesting ways, and the third completely confounds your expectations by bringing it down to a more human level, and yet still wrapped up everything in a nice neat package. Like the gift basket I was sent by the post office after I was run over twice by a postal truck, though in hindsight I suspect the second time may not have been an accident.
Range! Is this a hold-up? It's a science experiment!
The first film has the element of surprise, Part 2 has the element of wonder and amazement at what you're seeing, and Part 3 plays up the trilogy's strengths, the warmth and charm of these characters.
I apologize for the crudity of this model, but
Yeah, no, Doc, it's not the scale.
I can't imagine you haven't seen Back to the Future, but if you haven't, you've really been missing out. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.